Hello, my name is Ralph Strickland. I'm going to talk about the Slender Man case for my juvenile justice class through Asheville Buncombe Technical College. The Slender Man case was a very notorious case. It was scandalous in terms of who the victim was, but I think even more so when it was discovered who the perpetrators were. So I'm going to go into the background of the case here. The facts of the case are that on the afternoon of May the 31st, 2014, Anissa Wire and Morgan Geyser lured their friend Peyton Leutner to a wooded area near a park in Waukesha, Wisconsin. They stabbed her 19 times. And the really scandalous part of this is that all three girls were 12 years old when this occurred. Now, Wire and Geyser explained that they carried out this attack because they were trying to appease the fictional internet supernatural creature Slender Man. And Slender Man is a character of the so-called creepypasta movement, which is where he tried to come up with stories that just tried to creep people out. How they became convinced of why they needed to appease this person is an aspect of this case, this character is an aspect of this case. But that was their excuse for why they attacked Leutner. Leutner was stabbed 19 times by the girls, who left her in a wooded area in the park, claimed they were going to get help, and then she basically was able to crawl to a paved bike path. A bicyclist found her. Emergency services took her to surgery. She was in surgery for 6 hours, but she survived. And none of the stories I could find said that she had any long-term effects, physical effects from being stabbed, whatever mental effects there may have been. I mean, obviously that would not be something they would want to publicly share. Geyser and Ware were discovered by the police only a few miles away. They said that they were going to the Slender Man's house, which is supposedly called Slender Mansion, which was somewhere else in Wisconsin, according to the lore. They appeared to be quite nonchalant. They admitted what they had done. Geyser was covered in Leutner's blood when she was found. And I think the aspect of this that made it impossible for them to follow some, let's just say, normal juvenile justice procedures was that because it was so high profile, because it was such, it received such media scrutiny, that they couldn't, even from the outset, engage in a lot of the confidentiality that they normally do with juvenile justice cases. All right, so here we can see Ware on the left, that's Geyser on the right. Both of them stabbed Leutner. It isn't exactly fair to blame one or the other because they both reinforced the message that led up to the attack. However, Geyser will end up receiving a harsher sentence, and in many cases is seen more as the instigator of the attack. I don't know that that's a fair description, but I'm not sure of any other way to characterize it. All right. Now, despite the fact that they were 12, both girls were charged as adults. They don't come to trial really for 3 years after the attack. And during this time, there was considerable media scrutiny. People were understandably horrified. The charge that prosecutors decided to pursue was first-degree attempted homicide. All right. Of course, Leutner didn't die. Of course, it goes beyond something like aggravated assault. So it's a very serious charge. And both girls initially entered guilty pleas to lesser charges. However, the case did go to trial, and juries found them, in both cases, not guilty by reason of mental disease or disorder. Now, it's important to understand that in Wisconsin, that's not an acquittal, okay? That doesn't mean you walk free. Instead, what it means is that you will be sent to a mental hospital for a certain amount of time to be determined by the judge. Geyser got the maximum sentence allowed by law, which was up to 40 years confinement. Of course, I'll get into the specifics of how long they stayed in the mental hospital here in a moment. But as of today, neither girl is confined. Wire was released in 2021, and Geyser in just earlier this year in January 2025. Now, I want to talk for a minute about mental hospitals. I think we've made progress in the way we carry out mental health care here in the United States. Both of these pictures are Broughton Hospital here in Morganton. This is the original facility that was built in the 19th century. That's more the administration building. I looked for pictures of some of the wards, and what happened here is this new building that you can see, it was built just a few years ago. And what they did was they moved people out of some of the old wards, and they've sort of fallen into disrepair. And the pictures that I could find were of them in that condition. And I don't want to include them because I don't think it's fair. They look terrible. When they were in operation, they still had cages up on the porches and things like that. I mean, they still had big, heavy doors that locked. But they didn't look run down, and so that's not really a fair characterization. I worked at Broughton for about a year. I worked over on what was called 18 Male, which was a long-term ward. There were people who worked on the juvenile side. I didn't work over there. The people that worked there said it was not a good place to work, that the kids really were difficult to deal with, that it was hard to get them properly medicated, and that they displayed a lot of difficult behavior when they were in the hospital. Where I worked, they were older, they were on long-term care, and they were generally well medicated. All right. So there are legal questions regarding this case that have to be addressed. And one that was raised by an attorney from Florida was that there weren't really any Miranda protections offered to these two girls. The attorney points out the case of JDB versus North Carolina, which was decided just the year before in 2011, or just a few years before in 2011, where the police are required to take a child's age into account in determining whether to offer Miranda. And in doing so, the court took into account issues of mental development, all right? And this is consistent with what we've talked about in class, so-called life course theory, okay? This may have been a factor in the jury's verdict rather than to declare these girls guilty and send them to a prison, to declare them not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. All right, so we need to look at some theoretical perspectives that will help us understand this case. I think consistent with what we've just said, we can talk about developmental theories, such as the fact that as you develop into adolescence, your brain will undergo particular changes. You will have hormonal problems. You will have changes in your brain structure and chemistry. All right. This may help explain what took place in the case. And so that's one perspective we can use to understand what happened with these girls. But you could also have sociological perspective. And sociological perspectives would emphasize things like the group dynamics that were taking place there. Peer pressure between the two girls. They had both convinced themselves that this slender man was a real creature, a real phenomena, someone that they had to appease, someone who was going to hurt their family if they didn't. And so they were trying to essentially use Leutner as a sacrifice to appease Slender Man. All right. There is also extreme conformity when you're in adolescence, those group norms, even perverse group norms, are things that adolescents feel tremendous pressure to conform to. So it's important that we talk about rehabilitation, and because that's essentially what happened with the girls. They were sent to mental institutions instead of correctional institutions, and I think this reflects a growing consensus in our society that adolescents should be offered the opportunity to reform themselves, because we recognize that their brains are still developing, that they haven't reached the point in their life that they have, real cognition, that their minds don't work like those of adults. And so these girls were sent off. They remained in mental hospitals. Like I said, Geyser was just released this year, but both were released before their 25th birthday. And the idea is that hopefully they'll be able to reintegrate into society, and that they'll be able to overcome, if they can overcome, the stigma associated with such a high-profile case. All right. What questions do you have? Okay, I would field questions at this point.